Hey, folks, welcome back. If you've been around long enough, you know that the most outrageous battles aren't fought on a battlefield. Sometimes they're fought right at the end of your own driveway. Today we've got 5 stories about ordinary people who stood their ground against some truly extraordinary nerve. Grab your coffee, let's get into it. Hashtag story 1. The HOA president who picked the wrong farm. Some things in this world are sacred. A family home is one of them. The house at the center of this story is 150 years old. Built just after the end of the Civil War, it was constructed by hand, board by board, by a man who had watched the war flatten everything he owned. When the smoke cleared, he didn't sell. He built. And then he brought his family home. That house passed through 6 generations. It saw plumbing get added, then electricity. It saw children born and grandparents buried. And eventually, it passed into the hands of our storyteller's father, a man who worked the farm from the time he could walk, married a good woman, raised a house full of kids, and made sure every last one of them graduated college before they were allowed to pick up a shovel again. That's the kind of man he was. When the old man finally couldn't keep going, when his body simply wouldn't hold up, many in the family were privately relieved when he passed. Because watching a man like that lie still was harder than losing him. The farm passed to his oldest living son. And when the surrounding area grew into a shiny new suburban development, the offers started rolling in. Real estate developers with slick contracts and big numbers. Our storyteller turned them all down and kept every single rejection letter in a display on the wall. Like hunting trophies. He said it gave him the same satisfaction as a 12-point buck on the living room wall. He even made sure his own kids knew how to read those contracts. Anyone who tries to cheat them in the future is in for a very long day. Then the HOA letters started arriving. The neighborhood association wanted him to join up, put his land under their umbrella. He politely declined every single time and filed those letters right alongside the real estate offers, until one envelope arrived that was different from the rest. It wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. The HOA claimed they held a lien on his 150-year-old family home to collect 5 years of unpaid dues. Dues for a membership he had never agreed to. Now, most of us would have a strong reaction to that. Our storyteller had 3. First, calm down. Second, call the lawyer. Third, go find the person who sent this letter and ask some very pointed questions. He drove through the neighborhood, what he called a white suburban purgatory of middle-class bureaucracy, until he found himself sitting across a desk from Karen, the HOA president. Perfectly pressed, perfectly coiffed, with a tight little smile that told him she thought she'd already won. She explained, calmly and smugly, that his father had signed a contract joining the HOA before he passed. She offered her condolences. She said she'd had a good relationship with the old man. Our storyteller looked her dead in the eye and said, "My father made sure this land was cared for when he left it to me. The last thing any person in my family would ever do is sign away ownership to anyone." He demanded a copy of the contract. Karen refused. He told her he wasn't leaving until she produced it. It was his right as the property owner it referred to. She produced it. The signature was convincing. He had to hand them that. But he knew something Karen didn't. His father had been in surgery on the day that contract was supposedly signed. Under anesthesia. He couldn't have signed his own name on a get-well card that day, let alone a legal document. Karen's lawsuit came fast, within a day or 2. She claimed he'd violated the contract and, for good measure, added that he'd assaulted her in her own home. She wanted the property. Now, but here's where things turned. In court, Karen laid out her case, the forged contract, the letters she'd repackaged as past due payment notices. The lien. It looked polished. Then our storyteller's lawyer responded. His father's surgical records placed him nowhere near that notary on the day in question. And then came the trophy cabinet. Every letter he'd ever received and responded to, carefully preserved and dated. Every one of Karen's so-called past due notices was actually a letter he had already rejected. The HOA settled.
Lien removed.
But his lawyer wasn't done. Digging deeper, they found that Karen's letters had crossed the line into harassment under state law. They found financial records showing that dues paid by HOA members were flowing into accounts Karen controlled personally, accounts that had nothing to do with the HOA. Harassment. Fraud. Embezzlement. Karen won't be running anything again, not if she ever gets out. And the farm. Still standing. Still in the family. 150 years and counting. Hashtag story 2. The cowboy in Estonia with very smart cows. Now this next one takes us somewhere a little unexpected, Estonia. But trust me, the spirit of this story is pure American frontier. Our narrator is a 33-year-old man living in a quiet neighborhood a few hours from a city. He's a big fan of American cowboy culture, the lifestyle, the values, the whole deal, and he's done his best to build it on his 3-acre property in the European countryside. He's got a 2-story house, a small cow shed with 3 cows, and a couple of dogs that double as security. He also runs a modest YouTube channel. Now, one day he got the idea to strap a GoPro camera to one of his cows, inspired by a video he'd seen of someone doing the same with a dog. His neighbors loved it, so he put GoPros on all 3 cows. Hold on to that detail. It matters. For a year, the neighborhood was perfectly pleasant. His neighbors were considerate. They knew better than to let small children near full-grown cattle, and they always asked permission before letting their kids play with his dogs. He appreciated that so much that eventually he told them they didn't even need to ask anymore. Open gate policy. Big mistake. That summer, a new family moved in across the street. Our narrator watched from his porch as a woman in her 40s unloaded a minivan while screaming at her teenagers and shouting orders at the moving crew. 2 solid hours of it. He hadn't even introduced himself before she let herself through his unlocked gate, not to the gate, mind you, but straight to his front door, to inform him that her boys wanted to play with his cows. He said no. Firmly. She pushed back. He held the line. She left in a huff. 2 days later, she was at the gate again, announcing that her boys were having a rough day and needed to feel the calming energy of the cows. A neighbor politely told her that wasn't how things worked here. She ignored him. Our narrator ignored her from inside. This continued for 2 weeks. She'd show up, he'd ignore her, she'd eventually leave. Then came the morning he returned home at 6 a.m. after an emergency vet visit. His dog had an ear infection, and finally fell asleep with both dogs in his bedroom. He was jolted awake by his healthy dog barking at the window. He looked outside. His cows were on the neighbor's property, and Karen was standing in the street, scratch on her forehead, cut on her palm, screaming at him that his wild animals had shattered her windows and nearly killed her boys. What had actually happened was this. Her sons had broken into his property, coaxed the cows out, and promptly lost control of them. How did he know that? The GoPros. Every second of it was on video. When the police arrived, summoned by Karen, naturally, our narrator calmly invited the officers in to watch the footage. The neighborhood backed him up. Karen's face went pale when she realized the cameras had been rolling the entire time. She tried to leave. The neighbors stopped her boys. She came back screaming. The officers put her and her sons in the car. A week later, he got word. A restraining order had been issued, and Karen was moving out of the neighborhood. He let out the biggest sigh of relief he'd felt in years. And his cows? Thanks to all the excitement, they actually got very comfortable around children. Silver lining. Hashtag story 3. Fred and the funeral plot. This one is quiet, patient, and absolutely perfect. Fred had been married for 20 years when his wife sat him down at an upscale anniversary dinner and told him she wanted a divorce. She'd chosen the setting deliberately. Lots of witnesses, public place, Fred trapped with nowhere to go. That was her style. He later found out she'd been having an affair. He took it as well as a man can. He put together a complete itemized list of every shared possession, made her a copy, asked her to check off what she wanted. He tried to make it simple. She made it a nightmare. The demands escalated. The attorney fees climbed. Eventually Fred just agreed to everything to make it stop. About 18 months later, the divorce was final. Fred had already met someone new, a good woman, and they married shortly after. Then the ex-wife showed up in tears. The man she'd left Fred for had dumped her. Fred and his new wife were gracious about it. They consoled her. Fred, being fundamentally a decent man, stayed polite, even while quietly carrying the weight of everything she'd put him through. This opened the door to a strange ongoing situation. The ex-wife would call, drop by occasionally, and eventually ask to borrow money. Fred offered something better. During their marriage, he'd purchased 2 side-by-side funeral plots. He offered to buy her plot from her. She agreed, for a price in the neighborhood of $20,000. Fred paid it. And then Fred waited. Not long after, The ex-wife's stepfather passed away unexpectedly. She despised the man. He divorced her mother years back and wanted nothing to do with the funeral. Fred, however, had liked him and attended to pay his respects. At the service, he learned the family had no burial arrangements and no money to make any. Fred donated his plot, the one right beside hers. She didn't attend the funeral. She didn't know. But one day, she will find out that the man she couldn't stand is going to be her neighbor for eternity, right next to where she'll eventually rest, purchased with her own money. Fred, by all accounts, grins like a man who has made peace with the universe every time he tells that story. And honestly, same. ## story 4, 400 business cards. Some revenge doesn't require a courtroom. Sometimes all it takes is a trash can and a free Sunday morning. Our narrator had recently moved from the management office of a high-rise condo building to covering the weekend concierge shift, Sunday mornings, 7 to 3:30. It was quiet work. Retired residents, minimal foot traffic. He was good at it. Organized, punctual, clean desk. Then there was Terry. Terry was the weekday morning concierge, and the moment he sensed that the new guy might just be competent, he got territorial. One Monday, he came in and made a point of mentioning that the desk had been a mess over the weekend. Our narrator had worked Sunday. He had no control over what happened after his shift or before it, but Terry made it sound like it was his mess. That rankled. The following Sunday, our narrator did his usual tidying, and then some. He cleaned out the drawers, organized everything properly, and in the back of one of those drawers, he found a treasure, nearly 400 business cards, collected over years by Terry and stuffed away in no particular order. Terry had complained about the mess. Terry had said the desk needed to be kept tidy. So our narrator threw away every single one of those business cards. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did he have a grin on his face when he did it? You bet. Did that grin get bigger when Terry showed up Monday morning and noticed they were gone? He says it absolutely did. ## story 5. The bald chef and the hair in the food. And finally, a classic. Our narrator is 15 years old, out to dinner with his mother at an all-you-can-eat buffet. His mother is a woman who, by his own loving description, could reliably find something to complain about in almost any situation. On this particular evening, she'd been surprisingly pleasant. And then she looked down at her plate. Oh my God, there is a hair in my food. Her son, who knew her very well, looked at the hair, looked at his mother's long, thick, curly hair, and said, quietly, "Mom, that's your hair." She was having none of it. The scene that followed involved raised voices, theatrical outrage, and an increasing number of people in the restaurant turning to stare. The son tried to disappear into his chair. The waitress came over, listened to the complaint, and, without much visible concern, asked if she'd like to speak to the chef. His mother, certain she'd won, said yes. A few minutes later, a man walked out from the kitchen, completely bald. Not thinning, bald in the way that you could, as our narrator puts it, see your reflection in his scalp. The chef smiled pleasantly and asked what the trouble was. His mother said there was a hair in her food. The chef looked at her, looked at the plate, and said, calmly, with a smile, that unless he had miraculously grown a full head of hair between the kitchen and this table, that hair couldn't possibly be his. He was the only chef on duty. He turned and walked back to work. His mother had nothing to say. Her son, without a word, mouthed sorry to the chef as he left. He says he had a smile on his face for the rest of the evening. Well, folks, there you have it. 5 stories, 5 people who refuse to be pushed around, and enough justice to last the week. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've got a neighbor, a relative, or a coworker who's pulled something like this, drop it in the comments. I read every one of them. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. New stories go up every day, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.